Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We've got a very important webinar to talk about a very important change to how many immigrants will be able to access affordable health coverage through the Virginia insurance marketplace. Before we get started, I just wanted to go through a couple introductions about, we have a lot of new people joining us today about who Enroll Virginia is, and then just how to navigate the Zoom webinar today and how you can access some benefits. One thing I will note this morning is that this webinar is going to be recorded, and the slides will be shared as well afterwards to all registrants. One thing, just as you know, Enroll Virginia has been, now we're celebrating our 11th year of providing assistance to Virginians across the Commonwealth. We have navigators located throughout just to provide free and unbiased help with both the Medicaid and the insurance marketplace application and enrollment process. You can reach navigators either using the hotline, and that connects to all of the navigators, or you can use our map, which is at enrollva.org at the Get Help tab. And you can see here, this our map includes not only our navigator locations, but also our partner navigator and CAC locations throughout Virginia. So it's a great resource to get help navigating insurance, and especially with these important rule changes, which can get complicated. It's a good way to access help for yourself or people you might know who need help. One thing important to note is that this webinar is also going to be having a Spanish language audio option. People who are participating. Amber Perron, who is our outreach coordinator, is running that for us. And so if you are participating on Zoom, you can, toward the bottom of there, you can see that little option for interpretation is a little globe option. If you click on that, there'll be a Spanish option to choose. And with that, I'll stop my share and I'll turn it over to Eleanor. Take it away with the presentation.
Thank you so much, Deepak. Just a moment, folks, while I go ahead and get my presentation, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Eleanor. And I'll also note, do look in the chat. Mara has shared a link. That's where you can access the slides that Eleanor is going to be sharing this more, but sharing them in Spanish. So that's going to be the Spanish option.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Deepak. So thank you all so much for being here with us this morning. We're very excited to give this presentation. My name is Eleanor Sullivan. I'm a Medicaid policy analyst and a navigator with Enroll Virginia and with the Virginia Poverty Law Center. Just a couple of very quick housekeeping notes. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please put them in the Q&A. We're going to have a couple of points during the presentation that we'll stop and take questions, since this is some very dense and immigration-specific material. We want to make sure everybody's with us as we keep going through the content. And then, of course, we'll also do another question session at the very end of the presentation. So if anything pops up, please put it in the Q&A, and we'll get to it during or after the presentation. We're very excited to give this webinar. It is full of positive updates. National advocacy groups have been working a very long time to get DACA recipients access to affordable marketplace coverage, really ever since the Affordable Care Act was passed and DACA recipients were excluded at the time. We're really pleased to see not only DACA folks about to become eligible for the first time, but also several other non-citizen groups that are currently also cut out of marketplace coverage and financial subsidies. DACA recipients are the headliners of this new rule change, but they are not the only beneficiaries, and we'll be going over all of those details. So I did want to go over the agenda really quickly before we launched into the content. This training is designed principally for application assisters who help folks obtain marketplace or Medicaid coverage. I do have some general information in here, though, that could be helpful to other community-based organizations, to health providers, or even to DACA recipients themselves. This does mean that we'll get into some of the nitty-gritty details about what certain immigration statuses mean and how to handle their enrollment. So we'll go over as well some of the interaction between Marketplace and Medicaid programs. And since Medicaid is a state-run program, the information I'm going to give today is, maybe not surprisingly, specifically designed for Virginians. So we're going to go ahead and overview current immigrant eligibility, both for the Marketplace and Medicaid. We're going to go over the new rule. We're going to go over some of the details for the 6 new eligible immigrant statuses. We'll do a quick review of what the rule will look like going forward, and then we'll talk a little bit about outreach. So the first thing we're going to go over is, in order to understand the new rule for DACA recipients and these other non-citizen groups who are also included, you have to understand what the current rules are. So we're going to do a brief review, again, both of Virginia Medicaid and the Marketplace. We'll start with adult eligibility for immigrants here in Virginia. What non-citizens are eligible for Medicaid varies pretty considerably depending on what category of Medicaid that person falls into. Rules for immigrant adults who are between ages 19 and 64 and who are also non-pregnant, this is really the very strictest Medicaid category when it comes to immigration status. There are really only a handful of very specific immigration statuses that can qualify for Medicaid as non-pregnant adults. And on top of that, there are some additional restrictions. So for example, some statuses are subject to a 5-year bar, where they have to have held their immigration status for 5 years before they become Medicaid eligible. Lawful permanent residents or green card holders are one of those examples. There are other statuses like, say, withholding of removal, where there's a 7-year limit. Those folks can only have Medicaid for the first, possibly qualify for Medicaid for the first 7 years that they have that status. So some of the more common ones you're going to see are going to be those lawful permanent residents or green card holders. Refugees and asylees are eligible for full Medicaid. Parolees, special immigrant visa holders from Iraq and Afghanistan, Cuban and Haitian entrants. There are also some folks that are eligible, but we see very infrequently. Victims of trafficking and their immediate family members, Native Americans born in Canada, veterans, active military and their family members. So this list of statuses is really very, very particular, and it does exclude a lot of folks. Now, if we're talking about Virginia Medicaid for children and pregnant people, it's a very different scenario. And I do want to give sort of a quick nomenclature note here, because it'll continue to be relevant throughout the presentation. This chart refers to Medicaid or CHIP. For anybody that doesn't know, CHIP is the Children's Health Insurance Program. Essentially, CHIP is another public health program that's usually administered right alongside a Medicaid that supplements Medicaid for children and pregnant people. As a supplemental program, it can have higher income limits and broader immigration status rules, so it can let more folks enroll. States do have discretion in how generous to make these rules, and Virginia's actually adapted some pretty expansive immigration rules for CHIP, which is great. And so what that means is, if you are a child, and for Medicaid purposes, a child is anybody under 19, or if you're pregnant, almost any non-citizen with any lawful status can qualify, which is great. There are some notable exceptions. DACA recipients and some others don't qualify, but this is a pretty broad category. You know, it includes the lawful permanent residents or green card holders, refugees, asylees, also any child or pregnant person with a visa, except for a visitor visa, because those folks are not supposed to be living in the US. Folks with TPS or temporary protected status, non-DACA deferred action, parolees, withholding of removal. And very importantly, if you work with this category of folks, there are also some folks that are eligible for Medicaid CHIP for children pregnancy, who are eligible just with a pending immigration application. One of the most common ones we work with are children who are asylum applicants. After the asylum application has been pending for 6 months, those children can be eligible for Medicaid if they meet all the other qualifications. Also, children who have applied for special immigrant juvenile status can also already get Medicaid, even though their application is still pending. And then finally, starting in 2021, Virginia actually eliminated any requirement for pregnant individuals to have an immigration status in order to qualify for a CHIP coverage. Starting in 2021, Virginia initiated the famous prenatal program, and this program will give sort of CHIP Medicaid health coverage to pregnant folks, regardless of their immigration status, even if they're undocumented, which is a really great and positive change. So again, this is a much broader category than the one for adults. And then that brings us to the marketplace. So the marketplace, at the present moment, marketplace eligibility for immigrants is very similar to Virginia's Medicaid eligibility for immigrants. And that is that almost anybody with any kind of lawful immigration status will be able to qualify. Again, with the same handful of exceptions, like DACA recipients and a few others. So the statuses on this slide more or less reflect the statuses on the previous slide. It's just that it refers to folks regardless of their age. So, you know, adults or children with temporary protected status can qualify for the marketplace. Adults or children with deferred action can qualify for the marketplace. Same for withholding of removal, Cuban or Haitian entrants, victims of trafficking, visa holders, green card holders. And the same with pending applications, regardless of age. So for example, if you have somebody who has applied for asylum, children are eligible under those circumstances for the marketplace as soon as the asylum application has been pending for 6 months. For children 15 ages plus or adults, they're eligible for the marketplace once they have employment authorization, also known as a work permit. So just like children's Medicaid in Virginia, this is really a much broader category, which is great. All right, so this brings us to the new rule. The national advocates have promptly nicknamed this rule DACA, DACA for the Affordable Care Act. The DACA rule was finalized by Health and Human Services on May 3rd, just about a month ago. And what this new rule does is it gives a new definition to who is considered lawfully present for the purposes of the Affordable Care Act. And so what it does is it signals out 6 different newly eligible groups of immigrants who are currently barred from the marketplace and from the financial subsidies from the government that make marketplace coverage affordable. And it makes those folks lawfully present and therefore newly eligible for the marketplace. So there are 6 new groups of eligible non-citizens. And of course, we have first our headliners, the DACA recipients, deferred action for childhood arrivals. We also have adjustment of status applicants, folks who are applying for their green card. Anyone in general with employment authorization, you usually colloquially hear it called a work permit, will also be eligible for the marketplace. Individuals who have an approved special immigrant juvenile status will be eligible. Asylum applicant children who are under 14 will no longer have that 6-month waiting period that I referenced on the last slide. And then COFA migrants, individuals from Pacific Islands, Micronesia, Palau, and the Marshall Islands will also be eligible. And if all of this sounds like immigration jargon to you, not to worry, we're going to go ahead and review this list status by status to give you more context about what these status means and how to recognize folks that have this status a little bit further down in the presentation. But before we get to that, I do want to clarify what the new DACA rule does not accomplish. So when the proposed rule came out, Health and Human Services actually proposed this DACA rule for the first time in April of 2023, and it took them a full year to get around to finalizing that. And there was one very significant change. So under the proposed rule, all of these 6 non-citizen groups that I just referenced could enroll in the marketplace plan with subsidies. And also the proposed rule made these same groups eligible for CHIP programs, that Children's Medicaid, Pregnancy Medicaid, which we call famous in Virginia because we love to have our own terminology. It also extended CHIP Medicaid coverage to those same groups. The final rule that was just published preserved the marketplace eligibility for these non-citizens. It did not preserve the CHIP eligibility. So that is something that is really, really critical for you to know, is that going forward, these DACA recipients and other non-citizens will be eligible for the marketplace. They're not going to be eligible for Medicaid, even if they're a child or a pregnant person. So that is a very important note. And then lastly, about the new rule, when does it start? The government is not immediately implementing this new rule. It is giving the federal marketplace and the state marketplaces, and that includes Virginia, because starting last year, Virginia has its own state-based exchange, time to implement the rule. So the rule will go into effect on November 1 of 2024 this year. So starting November 1 of 2024, these newly eligible DACA recipients or other non-citizens can apply for marketplace coverage, and they can get a special enrollment period to go ahead and get coverage for December. And then they can also enroll using the open enrollment period for 2025 coverage that of course will start January 1 of 2025. All right, and we're going to go ahead and pause here really quickly and look at questions.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. I think the 2 questions that came in are somewhat similar in that one is the info update on the website. I think it's just a reminder on the date of when this goes into effect.
Yeah, so this will go into effect on November 1. So it lets folks enroll for a special enrollment period for December of this year, and then also enroll for coverage starting in 2025.
Yes, we have another question about these groups, just to confirm that whether these groups will be eligible for marketplace subsidies.
Yes, they will. They do have to meet all the other requirements for subsidies, of course. They have to file federal taxes. They have to have an income that lets them get subsidies. But yes, they will be eligible for subsidies, just like a US citizen or a green card holder or anyone else.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. So continue to use that Q&A option, and we'll answer questions as we go along. We'll have one more stoppage, and then we'll answer most of the questions at the end of the presentation. But thank you so much, Eleanor.
Perfect. Thank you, Deepak. All right, so now we're getting into the breakdown of the 6 newly eligible non-citizen groups. And this does get quite detailed. So we will go ahead and start with DACA, since again, they're sort of our program headliners. For those who are unfamiliar, DACA is an immigration program that was created in 2012 for youth and for young adults who are brought to the USA as children and who were previously living in the US without any sort of legal status. One thing that I do want to make very clear here, because this I think is a very common misconception about DACA, is that DACA is not a catch-all program. It has some very particular restrictions, notably chronological restrictions. And this means that if somebody is brought to the US as a child today, or even just in the last few years, they're not going to meet the qualifications for DACA. Really, DACA is a program that benefits a very specific generational cohort. And you can sort of see how that works when we review some of the specific rules. So to qualify for DACA, you have to have been a non-citizen who arrived in the US before you were 16 years old. You have to have been living in the US as of June of 2007. You have to have been under age 31 in 2012. You have to meet certain educational or military requirements. You have to have gotten a high school degree or be in the military. You have to be 15 years old at the time of your application, which we're going to see continue to be very relevant as we talk more about DACA. And you can't have been convicted of certain crimes, among some other requisites. These specific requirements really do narrow the scope of the program. It really means at the end of the day that most DACA, pretty much all DACA beneficiaries are going to be millennials, or they're going to be some of the oldest members of Gen Z. So DACA is not, again, an ongoing program, nor is enrollment in the program automatic. Individuals have to apply for DACA with the US government, and they have to complete a renewal process every 2 years. So it is ongoing work. DACA does have significant benefits, though. Anybody who receives DACA is protected from deportation solely on account of their immigration status. It means they're no longer considered undocumented. And recipients can also receive employment authorization, a work permit, and a social security number. So of course, this makes it much easier to access jobs and higher education. I think some really important context, especially as your agencies start to consider outreach, is what is the status of the DACA program right now? At the moment, there are about 580,000 DACA recipients. And under current law, that number really isn't going to grow. A 2023 court order prohibited the federal government from accepting new DACA applications. And in fact, the first government order that really cut off new DACA applications was all the way back in 2017. So the program really did stop growing back in 2017. Current recipients are still able to renew their status. But I think what's important about this for you to know as health providers or as application assisters is there's not going to be an infinite number of folks who are eligible under DACA. Under the circumstances as they are with the court orders, I would expect a lot of enrollment assisters to see a surge of DACA clients in the fall, and then to sort of have that slowly taper off for new DACA clients over the next couple of years. So under the current rule, just to review, under the current rule, all DACA recipients are ineligible for the marketplace and for Medicaid CHIP. The new rule starting in November will allow DACA recipients to qualify for marketplace plans with subsidies. They still cannot be eligible for Medicaid or CHIP. On paper, this is a bit of a bummer. In reality, it's actually a little bit immaterial because the rule would have only made DACA recipients eligible for children and pregnancy Medicaid. DACA recipients can actually already access a form of Medicaid in Virginia because we have the famous prenatal program that already covers undocumented pregnant people. And then because 2017 was essentially the last year that immigrants could submit new applications for DACA, that means that a lot of DACA, there are really no DACA recipients left that are under age 19, and they're not going to qualify for children's Medicaid anyway because they already aged out. So kind of mixed news on this one. The next status that we're going to go ahead and talk about is adjustment of status. Adjustment of status refers to when an immigrant applies for a green card and they're able to actually have their green card interview here in the United States. Adjustments of status applicants are becoming eligible with no other additional rules for the first time under this new rule in November. Adjustment of status applicants can be granted work permits while they wait for their green card application to be decided, which can usually take some time, you know, like many other immigration processes, it can take a year or two, if not more. I do think an important note here especially for your outreach efforts, is you cannot just categorize this as all green card applicants will now be able to qualify for the marketplace. The reason for this is that there are two different bureaucratic processes for obtaining a green card. So again, adjustment of status is for folks who apply for a green card and can interview here in the US. There's a different and much more difficult pathway called consular processing, where immigrants can have a green card interview, but they have to return to their country of origin and do their interview abroad in a US consulate. Those folks are not eligible for the marketplace. So essentially what this does is this new rule selects a certain number of green card applicants and lets them get marketplace coverage, and it continues to exclude others. So just to review, under the current rule, if somebody has an application for an adjustment of status, an applicant for a green card, they can only qualify for health coverage right now if they also have an approved visa petition. And in this context, what immigration law means, it's not referring to a tourist visa, it's not referring to a student visa. When it says an approved visa petition, it actually means something like a family petition or an employment petition that becomes the basis of green card eligibility. This sounds like a technicality, but it's actually been a very significant caveat. A lot of people who apply for a green card actually submit their family petition and their green card application at the same time. And immigration makes a decision about the two applications at the same time. That made it relatively unusual that somebody would have a visa petition that's already been approved, but still have their green card application pending. Usually it's all done together. So that actually denied a lot of folks coverage. So starting in November, anybody who has applied for a green card through an adjustment of status here in the US can qualify for the marketplace with subsidies immediately. And we've completely cut out that visa application requirement. This is actually a very significant part of the new rule change. Again, DACA folks are sort of the headliner, but a lot of people are actually going to gain access to coverage through this particular part of the rule, because there are a lot of people that apply for a green card every year in the US. So this is just another very positive change. The next one we have are asylum applicants. So for anybody that's not familiar with asylum, non-citizens can apply for asylum if they can show the US government that they are facing some kind of harm in their home countries and that their harm is actually tied to their identity. So is somebody targeting them because of their race, because of their religion, because of their national origin? Asylum applications are really, really complex. They can pend with the government for many years, and it can be very hard to win these cases because of the requirement that persecution be tied to identity. So the government is allowing asylum applicants after a certain amount of time to get health coverage, knowing that they could be hanging out as asylum applicants on a waiting list for a really long time. A note here is that children and spouses can sort of appear as dependents, called derivatives, on a primary asylum applicant's petition. So you could have a mom apply for asylum and she's able to include her husband and include her children. This lets a whole immediate family apply together. That also means that a lot of receipt letters might appear only under that principal applicant's name. Just an important note there for anybody that does direct assistance. So what's changing under the new rule? Nothing's changing for adults. Nothing's even changing for children who are 15 and older. The new rule implements a very positive change, but only for asylum applicants who are age 14 and under. So really only your younger kids. Under the current rule, asylum applicants who are 14 and under can qualify for Marketplace or for Medicaid CHIP if their application has been pending at least 180 days, about 6 months. The new rule takes away that 180-day 6-month requirement. which is great. That means that asylum applicants who are ages 14 or under can now get marketplace coverage as soon as they have a receipt letter from the government acknowledging that asylum application. So it's much faster coverage, which is great. Now, this is a very positive rule change. It's not entirely an uncomplicated one, especially if you're an assister helping folks. So the reason for that is that this rule will now sort of make it so that asylum seekers of different ages will become eligible for health coverage at different times for different programs. So again, just to review, children under 14 can get in the marketplace as soon as their asylum application is lodged. Minors who are 15 to 18 still have to wait until they have employment authorization or a work permit until they enroll in the marketplace. And then any child under 19, whether they're 5, whether they're 17, can enroll in Medicaid famous coverage in Virginia once their asylum application has been pending for 180 days. So what does this mean if you're an assister or if you're an asylum applicant? The first thing it means is there's going to be more coverage transitions. So children who are 14 and under might be able to enroll in a marketplace plan immediately as soon as they've applied for asylum. And then 6 months later, they might be eligible for Medicaid instead if their family's income is lower. So you might be working with folks where you get a child into the marketplace and 6 months later, you're going to have to go back and get them into Medicaid instead. It's also going to lead to sort of more piecemeal coverage dates for families. You might have children in the same households who are at different ages and they're going to get enrolled at different times. So, you might have a family that has a 5-year-old and an 18-year-old, and you're going to be able to enroll the 5-year-old in marketplace coverage immediately. And you're going to have to wait 6 months to put their older sibling into either the marketplace or Medicaid. So again, this is a good rule change, but it's really a good rule change for little kids and not for older adolescents, unfortunately. The next status we have is special immigrant juvenile status. You hear it called SIJS a lot. SIJS has an interesting history. The government initially created it for unaccompanied minors who are coming into the USA from other countries and who are coming alone without an adult. SIJS has been expanded somewhat since its inception. Nowadays, non-citizen children can apply for SIJS if a family court has deemed them to be abused, neglected, or abandoned by at least one parent, and the family judge has found it to not be in the best interest of the child to return to their country of origin. An SIJS petition doesn't actually do anything for the person in and of itself. It doesn't give them lawful status. What it does do is it becomes the basis for an adjustment of status green card application. So in prior years, youth with an SIJS approval could immediately apply for a green card. As soon as the government said, yes, you're eligible for SIJS, here's your approval letter, they could turn around and make that green card application. That rendered them eligible for Marketplace and Medicaid. And that's because they were considered adjustment of status applicants with an approved visa petition, because the SIJS was a visa petition. However, things are different now. Right now, SIJS holders face a waiting list to just apply for a green card, much less get a green card. And under the current rules, that leaves SIJS approved children and adults in a health coverage limbo. So with this rule change, Health and Human Services is really sort of sweeping up this mess, closing this gap, and taking care of these people with an approved SIJS petition that can't immediately get a green card. It's making sure they can have health coverage while they wait on that green card process. So under the current rule, actually applicants for SIJS status are eligible for the Marketplace or for CHIP or Medicaid if they're pregnant or children. But the current rules are actually silent on whether individuals with approved SIJS status can also qualify. And again, this is just because the government is assuming that people with approved cases can turn around and apply for a green card immediately. The new rule sort of allows for the fact that this is no longer the reality. So the new rule starting in November allows both applicants for SIJS and individuals with approved SIJS to become eligible for the marketplace. Now, this is a little bit like the asylum rule, which is that it's very positive. It's also really complicated. So the reason that it's really complicated is that people with an approved SIJS application might actually already have a pathway either into the marketplace or even into Virginia Medicaid if they're a child or pregnant. So this is for 3 reasons. The first is that if you're just an applicant for SIJS, you can already qualify for the Medicaid or for children's Medicaid, depending on age and income, right? Also, starting in May of 2022, the federal government started granting an additional immigration status to people that had an approved SIJS application. This is called deferred action. Deferred action allows its beneficiaries to have a work permit, a social security number, and protection from deportation. And the government essentially is giving these SIJS approved individuals deferred action to tide them over as they sit there on the green card waiting list. But the nice thing about this is that anybody with deferred action already qualifies for marketplace coverage or for children's Medicaid, depending on age and income. And then the last one is SIJS approved people could already qualify for children's Medicaid or the marketplace if they've already submitted their green card application. So what this means is really this new rule only benefits a small percentage of SIJS recipients. It's going to mostly benefit people that receive their SIJS before May of 2022, so before the government started giving that deferred action, and who have also not yet applied for a green card. So I know all of this really is a bit of a jigsaw puzzle and can get complex. I think that if there's one takeaway for this, the important thing to know is if somebody with SIJS comes to you and asks you for help tomorrow, don't just tell them that they're only going to become eligible in November. It's very possible that they already could be eligible for the marketplace or for children's Medicaid. You will want to do an eligibility screening and see if they can get into coverage either through the deferred action or through the adjustment of status, the green card application. So don't hold on for these folks. Our very last one, COFA. This is kind of a standout. So COFA refers to Compact of Free Association Migrants. These are citizens, again, from 3 Pacific Islands, Micronesia, Republic of the Marshall Islands, Palau. Due to a very special treaty between these islands and the United States, their citizens can actually lawfully reside in the US, and they don't need another immigration status on top of it. Just being a citizen of one of these islands is enough in and of itself to let them come to the US, work, have a social security number, qualify for benefits. This is also very different than the groups that we reviewed earlier, because these individuals are actually already Medicaid and CHIP eligible. They just weren't marketplace eligible, which is a little bit counterintuitive because usually marketplace coverage is a little looser than Medicaid rules. So the new DACA rule, ACA-DACA rule, extends marketplace coverage to COFA migrants to make it so that they're not eligible for Medicaid without the marketplace, because that makes no sense. And if you're enrolling a COFA migrant, it's very simple. They just have to have proof of their nationality, just a passport or a birth certificate. All right, I think that we're going to pause here and maybe cover just a couple more questions before we finish the last few slides.
Thank you, Eleanor. One question we've gotten a couple times, and I think this is mainly kind of going back to the kind of that important program, the famous prenatal program, and eligibility for that program specifically. Well, one, it's you know, whether anything is changing with that program, or and whether DACA currently can access that program.
Yeah, so the famous prenatal program just has no restrictions about immigration status. So undocumented people can access famous prenatal. People with DACA can access famous prenatal. It really does catch everybody. So that is one nice thing, is that currently in Virginia, pregnant people, as long as they meet income and other Medicaid requirements, they can get Medicaid. Immigration status really just is no longer important.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eleanor. And we'll be sharing in the chat, you'll see there in the chat, and we'll share it afterwards too, some resources about famous prenatal itself and the kind of other resources that are available for pregnant people in Virginia as well. There's a question, and I'll just read it to you so you can understand what it says here. So it says for DACA, it says B15 at the time of application. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes. So in order for somebody to qualify to apply for DACA, they have to be 15 years old when they apply. You know, as I said, the DACA program isn't currently accepting new applicants, so today it's irrelevant. But back when DACA was accepting new applicants, say 2012, 2013, 2014, you might meet all the other requirements of DACA, but if you were 8 years old, you couldn't apply yet. If you're 12 years old, you couldn't apply yet. You had to wait until you were 15 in order just to submit an application for the government to consider you.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, it says at least 15 or 15 or older.
15 or older. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Eleanor. So we'll hold that and to continue to use the Q&A chat, and then we'll hold the rest of the questions at the end of the presentation, which is happening soon. Thank you, Eleanor.
Thank you, Deepak. Yeah, we have just another couple of slides, and then we'll get back to some of the questions. So the next one is really just a helpful reference slide. We went over at the beginning of the presentation what current rules are for immigration status for the marketplace. This is an updated slide. So starting in November 1 of 2024, this is what marketplace eligibility for immigrants is going to look like. We still have the same folks that were always there, our lawful permanent resident green card holders, our refugees and asylees, our folks with a current visa, temporary protected status, all those folks are still there. But we've gone ahead and added on here the changes that you're going to see in November for the marketplace. So we've added DACA recipients. We've added special immigrant juvenile SIJS recipients. We've added anyone with the employment authorization. We've added the COFA migrants. We've broken out the asylum applicants because that rule is now different depending on if you're 14 and under or 15 plus. So starting in November, once again, if somebody has applied for asylum and they're 15 years old or over, they're only eligible for the marketplace once their employment authorization work permit has been granted. The change here you'll see in red is that child asylum applicants, ones who are 14 and under, will be able to get into the marketplace just as soon as the asylum application is received. So again, younger children can get into the marketplace before their older family members. And then we also showed the adjustment in red at the bottom for adjustment of status green card applicants. The current rules, they can only get to the marketplace if they have an approved visa petition, like a family petition, an employer's petition, And starting in November, that requirement to have an approved visa petition is going to be cut out. So as soon as anybody applies for a green card here in the US through adjustment of status and has a receipt letter, they can get into the marketplace. So this is really just sort of a handy reference slide that sums up what we went over earlier in the presentation. And then outreach. I do think this is a fairly important point. And that's because as I've talked more and more to folks in the community, I've realized how many misconceptions there are around DACA recipients and other folks, especially around age. So there are a couple of very important points I want to make here. You know, as you're conducting outreach and as you're deciding where to go to try to reach DACA recipients and other newly eligible immigrants, something really important, DACA is explained as a program for young people. And that is true. You had to have been younger, a certain age, when you applied for the program when it first opened in 2012. At risk of getting myself in trouble in terms of who I'm calling young and not young, I think perhaps the oldest DACA recipients maybe wouldn't fit under the rubric of young anymore. The oldest recipients were born in 1981. So that makes our oldest possible DACA recipients, what, 43? Again, you're not young, but you're not a teenager either, right? And the youngest possible recipients should have been born in 2002. And this gets back to the requirement that folks be at least 15 years old when they apply for DACA. And it also gets back to the fact that in 2017, the federal government under the prior administration blocked new applicants. So if our youngest possible applicants were born in 2002, they're going to be 22 years old, 21, 22. So I think what's important to take away from this is that don't just go looking for DACA recipients in schools, in high schools and colleges. There are a lot of DACA recipients who are in their 20s, who are in their 30s, and who are even in their early 40s. And to reach those folks, you really have to do outreach to a broader community and not just schools, although schools are an important piece as well. Colleges, maybe. I don't think we really have DACA recipients in high schools anymore at 22. There's something similar for special immigrant juvenile status recipients. So special immigrant juvenile status is for people who are children at the time of application. And when the government says children, it means that applicants have to be under 21 when they initiate their SIJS application. It can take several years for the government to approve the SIJS status, and then it can take another couple of years to get a green card. And all of that means that we could have SIJS folks that are in their 20s and who are no longer minors. So once again, don't just go looking for teenagers when you're doing outreach to SIJS recipients. Another thing as well that I think I do want to make very clear, DACA recipients are the headliners of this new rule. They are not necessarily the largest number of folks who are gaining coverage. That's going to be adjustment of status applicants. So as we talked about earlier in the presentation, right now, because court orders bar the government from accepting new DACA applications, program enrollment is pretty much capped. It can't grow. There are over 500,000 DACA recipients, and until the law changes, that's going to be it. So, you know, that's a good number of folks, but it's limited. Adjustment of status applicants, very different. There are people that apply for green cards in the US every single day. So for example, I went back and looked at numbers, and in January of this year, US Citizenship and Immigration Services processed almost 50,000 green card applications just in that 1 month. So that is about, I mean, you do that times 12 months, that's about 600,000 potential new marketplace applicants every year. So unlike DACA recipients where enrollment is capped, there are always going to be new green card applicants. So they are numerically, green card applicants are really the largest group that is benefiting from this rule change rather than DACA recipients. I think a great place to try to do outreach would try to be to reach out to, immigration attorneys' offices. DMVs would be another good place to do outreach. A lot of folks that are newly applying for green cards get their work permit and they go to the DMV to get a driver's license. So that would be another good place to do outreach. But just keep in mind that adjustment of status applicants are really a very significant group. And it would be worth trying to find a lot of them. All right. I think that's it for us today now. I think we can go ahead and return to some of the unanswered questions we have in our Q&A.
Yeah, thank you so much for a great presentation, Eleanor. Yeah, we do have quite a number of questions and continue to kind of send them in. And if we're not able to answer your question live today during the webinar, we are keeping track of these and we'll follow up with you individually afterwards. One question, I think, just to clarify, I think this goes back to the 5th slide, I think it was. Just what is meant by battered immigrant on that slide? Is that a specific legal classification or DV? I think it was in that context of who's eligible for programs, who's not eligible. If you can go back.
So that is very complex. The answer to that is when the government set that rule, they did have a very specific immigration status in mind, and that is the VAWA, Violence Against Women Act recipients. Violence Against Women Act recipients, these are non-citizens who are married to a U.S. citizen or green card holder. And under normal circumstances, being married to one of those folks means that you have a path towards a green card because that person will petition for you as their spouse. If that U.S. citizen is abusive, they're probably not going to petition for you. Keeping your spouse undocumented is a great way to maintain control over them. So the government recognized this several years ago, and it started allowing abused spouses of U.S. citizens and green card holders to do their own petitions for a green card and show that they were married to a U.S. citizen, it was a true bona fide marriage, and that they were abused. So when it says battered immigrant, that is what Medicaid has in mind. But Medicaid has extended essentially the eligibility to anybody at any point in the VAWA process. So that could include somebody that has an approved VAWA application, a pending VAWA application, or even just enough evidence to show that they would qualify for VAWA. I think for the first 2 categories, pending VAWA, approved VAWA, that's easy to prove because you have a receipt letter from the government. For the last one, to show that you just qualify, it's a very complicated application process because you have to submit all the proof that you'd submit for a VAWA application, and that can be several hundred pages. So it is a somewhat specific definition. It's just that Medicaid has expanded it to all stages of a possible VAWA application process, and therefore it can get very complicated. If anybody runs into a situation like that, I do recommend you get in touch with us so we can give you support throughout the application process.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. And you'll probably notice again in the chat for the webinar, Mara is sharing some links to various flyers. We will also share these flyers afterwards, after the webinar completes, when we share the recording and slides as well. And one thing that we just shared on there is just a more detailed flyer that we created that's on health coverage options for domestic violence survivors. And that's both for Medicaid rules, special enrollment opportunities in the marketplace, and then some of this, a little bit on this, the VAWA and the U visa pieces. Thank you so much for that, Eleanor. There's a little more detailed question here, just about kind of, I guess, how this will work in practice a little bit. It's a question from Maria asking about kind of, I guess, specific to a situation here where there's a European citizen who has an approved fiance visa and will be applying for LPR status after marrying the U.S. citizen. What are generally the coverage options available for the for this person?
So he would be eligible for the marketplace already under the current rule. That once he applies for his LPR, his lawful permanent resident status, and has a receipt letter from immigration, he should actually already be eligible for marketplace coverage and doesn't have to wait until November. That's because a fiance petition is considered an underlying visa petition because it's a family-based petition. And so that means that he already meets the current requirements because he meets the two prongs of adjustment of status application for a green card and approved visa petition. So he already qualifies. He's in good shape. He just needs to get his green card application in and have that receipt.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. So we have about a minute, 2 minutes remaining. We'll just do like one more question and then just kind of wrap it up after that. But I think one question coming in from Wujin is just, for DACA recipients, this rule is going into effect November 1st. Does that mean they're going to have to enroll both for 2024 coverage and 2025 separately?
Yes, they will. Unfortunately.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Eleanor. That's right. So I guess, yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. We will be sharing these slides and the various resources that we shared in the webinar chat following the to everyone who's registered. Also note, in there, if as we get closer to November, if you'd like to partner with us on outreach and kind of reaching both broadly, just uninsured Virginians or some of the immigrants who are now newly eligible, we'd love to work with you to kind of reach them and even in November start assisting them access these new programs. But thank you so much, and thank you again, Eleanor, for a great presentation.
Thank you all so much for being here.